Good morning, afternoon or evening, and welcome back to the Faction Overview series. Now we're well into the home straight, so let's have a look at one of the top Ottoman precursors around. They are the they're these guys. The Seleucid Empire is considered one of the top factions in the game by many players. It's a faction that has flexibility, a wide-ranging army and considerable range units, while offering a chance for early expansion. So let's find out a little more. Number 1, you can choose your champions. You get to choose from 2 groups of champions when you get to Phase 3, and this means that you pick 2 out of the available 4, so choose wisely. Number 2, they are one of only 2 factions with access to the mini civic centre that is the military colony. It's a fantastic building and we'll cover it in the next section. Number 3, they have the longest range units in the game: archers, horse archers and chariot archers. Now this means it's easy to harass from distance if that's your style. Number 4, they also have decent cavalry options when compared with all factions but the Persians. They have everything apart from swordsmen available, and they even have a unique upgrade. And finally, they have a combination of things about them that lead to excellent fortress efficiency, and we'll look at that later on in the video. Now if you're intrigued, you should be. Your unique buildings are not full of options, to be honest. However, the first we're going to cover is nonetheless pretty awesome. It's available in Phase 2 and it's the military colony. It's cheap at only 40% of the cost of a civic centre, and it works rather like a small version of this with the same general attributes related to territory, training women and training soldiers. However, the soldiers are all mercenaries, so they cost metal, which is worth bearing in mind. The second building is the library, and now we've covered this before, but in essence it gives 10% off the cost of all upgrades and also has another upgrade available which will affect your civic centre. We're going to be looking at that later in the video in the upgrades section. With regard to units, you're going to start with spearmen and skirmishers for infantry and a skirmisher cavalry, which you'll know by now is pretty much the default lineup. However, unlike factions, you're going to have an additional unit available in Phase 1, but only from your barracks, and that's a pikeman. Now if you're interested to know the difference between pikemen and spearmen, which is something that not all players even realise is a thing, then check out my video on their differences. Now when we move to Phase 2, that only brings 1 additional soldier, and that is a horse archer. But when you build the military colony that we've already discussed, it will give you an additional 3 mercenaries, and these are an archer, a swordsman and a lancer cavalry. Now obviously, as with all the factions that have mercenaries, you also have available the expertise in war upgrade, and this will effectively turn your swordsmen into Skiritai commandos, which I'm sure you'll agree is a huge bonus. Your siege weapons are pretty basic, but they're solid. It's a catapult and a siege tower. Now the siege tower can be particularly useful for transferring slow troops like pikemen and also drawing fire away from your point and smash unit, which for the Seleucids is an elephant rather than a ram. All in all, it's pretty unspectacular, but you have a decent few options and it enables the faction to suit many different playstyles. Your champion units are interesting, as although 4 types are theoretically available, you've got to choose which 2 you'll use via the Army Reforms button. Now the options you have are the traditional army, which is the pikeman and scythe chariot, or the reform army, which is a lancer cavalry and a heavy swordsman. So if you're facing an opponent that uses rams a lot, and this especially applies if you're playing Britons, Gauls, Spartans or Iberians, then the heavy swordsman can be invaluable in a defensive mode. However, if you fancy a more aggressive playstyle and you want to dictate to your opponent, then I would favour the powerful and very mobile chariots of the reform army. So you have to make your choice, and once it's been made there's no going back. So intel about your opponent's faction, style and army composition are going to be critical to make sure that you make the right choice. And so we arrive at heroes, which for the Seleucids, well, they're amongst the game's best, and that's another reason that they're such an interesting faction. So let's find out a little more about their 3 options. First up we have a cavalry swordsman, Antiochus the Righteous. He's going to reduce your enemy's buildings, siege engines and ships' health by 20% when he's within 80 metres, which is decent if unspectacular, although it can prove very useful on naval maps. Next up we have a lancer cavalry, Antiochus the Great. Now he's an excellent accompaniment to the Seleucids' cavalry options, as being within 45 metres of him will give all cavalry a +2 armour bonus. He's effectively like a slightly less good version of the Athenians' Iphicrates in that sense, and well worth looking into. And finally we have my personal favourite, Seleucus the Victor. He's an elephant, and I love elephant heroes, and he gives 20% attack and speed bonus to all your war elephants. Now this is a top class bonus that can make a group of elephants cause an absolute riot in your enemy's base. However, bear in mind that their armour still leaves them vulnerable to skirmishers, so they are still far from a sure thing. And before we move on to upgrades, another important factor regarding the heroes is that they're trained from your civic centre. This means that as soon as you hit phase 3, resources permitting, you can train a hero. No waiting for a fortress for you. Also, it means that once you've built the fortress, you can get straight on with training siege weapons and champions. This gives the Seleucids a big advantage against other factions, where waiting for a phase 3 building to train a hero can slow down your final army composition. And what of the upgrades, I hear you ask? Well, ask and ye shall receive. You know, that's kind of my thing with these overviews. So first up, let's look at Nicaean warhorses. This will give all cavalry plus 25% health, but it means they'll take 10% longer to train. But however, you combine this with Antiochus the Great's bonus and you've got an incredible cavalry attack. The next unique upgrade is definitely my favourite for the Seleucids. It's Parade of Daphne and increases batch speed production from the fortress. This means you wait less time for your catapults, war elephants and champions. It's a great little bonus when you choose the Seleucids. And the final upgrade is the one mentioned earlier, that's Hellenistic Metropolis. It comes from the library, and it doubles your civic centre's hit points and defensive arrows, and it also affects military colonies, which makes it well worth getting, as that makes them just so much harder to dislodge from your opponent's side of the map. We've now established that the Seleucids are a solid faction with good options of play styles and units, so let's take a look at how they can be used in our strategy conclusion. First up, use the military colony early on. This is essential to give you access to swordsmen, which can be used against fast developing Britons or Gauls players. It's the best way to stop their rams. Also, make that military colony as far into your opponent's half of the map as you reasonably can. This gives you access to their resources and is going to stump their development. It also discourages attacks on your civic centre, as your opponent's required to kick out this expansion before focusing on your base. Secondly, decide early if the map is favourable to cavalry. If it is, then focus on hunting for food with the idea that Antiochus the Great and Nicaean warhorses are going to stamp all over your enemy. If you're not the best with cavalry, then practice using them to harass, as this will hugely improve your game and thus your results. And finally, make the most of the fortress bonuses as soon as your first one is built. Use that batch speed bonus to spam out as much in the way of champs and siege as you can afford, while using your civic centre to produce your hero. And another video comes to an end, and we're really starting to run out of factions now, which is pretty exciting. Very shortly I hope to be bringing you overviews of the Celtic factions, the Romans and the Ptolemies, which are all civilizations favoured by a lot of players. So keep an eye out by liking, subscribing and hitting that bell notification. Obrigado e adeus.